Hello, geeks. Welcome to Geeking Out, the podcast about all geeky aspects of software delivery, DevOps, observability, reliability, and everything in between. I'm your host, Adriana Villela, coming to you from Toronto, Canada. And geeking out with me today, I have Liz Fong-Jones of Honeycomb. Welcome, Liz.
G'day, Audrey, from Sydney, Australia.
Thank you for waking up early to record.
That's kind of my life these days, given that I work with people from the US and Canada. Start early, take a break midday, and then work late to catch the UK.
Oh, damn. Wow, that is a lot.
That's a voluntary choice that I made to move to Australia, so I fully accept that.
Are you permanently moved to Australia? Because before I remember you were splitting your time between
I'm still splitting
Australia
my
and...
time,
Okay.
but I have a house here, I have clients here, so I'm spending several months a year here.
Oh, nice, nice. And hopefully, how's the weather down under right
A
now?
little
I know
bit
it's
chilly
winter,
and
right?
rainy, but not by Canadian standards, right?
True, true.
People are
Yeah, yeah.
complaining, oh, it's 10 degrees or 15 degrees, and I'm just like, yeah, whatever, it's
I
fine.
know, right?
I have a jacket.
There you go. Yeah, we've had we've had a hot summer in Toronto actually, like Brazil hot, which is where I'm from originally. And yeah, I have a pretty good heat tolerance, but I have been melting. So yeah.
Yeah, it's fun to it's like the sauna to the ice bath, right? Like I going back and forth. You get used to rapid climate changes in addition to time zones. That's the thing that no one tells you about
Yeah,
is
that,
the climate change.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, I'm super excited to have you on the show, and for folks who have been listening to Geeking Out, Liz was on Call Me Maybe way back when I used to host that with Anna, and so I'm very excited that you've agreed to come on. Now, before we start off, I always like to start my guests off with some icebreaker questions. So, are you ready?
As ready as I'm going to be.
All right. First question. Are you a lefty or a righty?
I am a righty, like a majority of the population.
All right. Do you prefer iPhone or Android?
I am an Android user because Google gave them to me for free for about a decade. I was one of the early one of the Android beta testers. So that meant that I got free phones that might break, and that habit has carried on since after I left Google.
Oh, that's so cool. How was it like having used like the early Android phones? What kind of experience was that?
Uh, yeah, you get them early in the technical validation process, and you help carry them through all the way to production. Because of the NDA, I can't talk exactly about what the
Oh,
experience was like, but yeah, no, it's cool having access to the latest hardware. It's actually though, it makes you weirdly paranoid. Right, because you have to hide your phone from being photographed by others, right? You have to,
oh,
slip it in your pocket at all times. Like, you can't just leave it out on the table. So it does introduce some interesting complications to your life, but it was worth it at the time to get access to the latest and greatest hardware and to give the team feedback on it.
well, that's so cool. Okay, next question. Do you prefer using Mac, Linux, or Windows?
I am a hardcore Linux user, with one exception. Well, it's technically still Linux on the desktop. I am a Chrome OS user for my laptop. Again, like habit from my Google days.
Yeah.
But yes, I do my development in a VM on that Chrome OS machine, so it's Linux. I'm talking to you from a Linux machine. I have a habit of building mini ITX PCs that are all Linux based. So I think I've got like four little computers running around, each of which is its own like independent Linux system.
So are you then like a lifelong Linux user? Like, did you ever dabble in Windows?
I've been using Linux since I was 16, since 2003, 2004. So
Cool.
yeah. But it's been my primary environment since college. So since 2005.
I was I guess forced DOS was forced upon me. Because I mean, like when Windows
Oh yes, of
3.1 came
course, right?
out.
Like MS DOS. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, no, no.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
as a kid, yes.
yeah, right, right.
Yeah, Q
I
Basic. Yeah, yeah.
you basic. Oh my god, yes, exactly. Yeah,
I
I
knew I
always
was destined to become a programmer when, in I think fourth grade, I wrote a program that would take three sets of coordinates and solve the quadratic equations.
that's so cool. Yeah, my dad got me into basic. He pulled me aside when I was 10 and he's like, "How'd you like to see something cool?" I'm like, "All right,
Yeah,
yeah."
yeah, yep. It runs in my biological family. I've got uncles and aunts who work in IT, so yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, next question. What's your favorite programming language?
Ooh, favorite. That's an interesting question. So I'm somewhat known for solving advent of code every year. I've been doing advent of code every year since it started in oh goodness, I don't even remember when it started, but like 2017 or something like that. So I've been doing advent of code in Go publicly on stream when I can for the better part of a decade now. So definitely Go is a programming language I even use in recreation. Go is the language that I use professionally. But it's really hard to pick favorites because I work with clients. Clients use all kinds of languages. I have to be a little bit of a polyglot as a result.
Yeah.
So like I have a hobby project that's written in TypeScript, for instance. I think it's really important to not just settle into a rut and be like, I am a Java programmer, right? Like I
Yeah.
think you kind of have to see and experience kind of what's going on. So at some point, I will pick up Rust, I am sure, and become the prototypical stereotype of a trans cat girl who programs in Rust and has stripy socks. But that's not going to be today.
Fair enough, fair enough. I do really like what you said about like, just broadening your horizons and learning other languages because, I was actually like, I was a Java developer for like 15, 16 years, and that was like my whole life. And then a friend introduced me to Python, and, I was like in my 30s at the time. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Like, it was for the first time, like since, my basic days, I did QBasic, Visual Basic, that I was like
Mm.
actually picking up another language. And I'm like, freaking cool. I got to do more of that. And yeah, and that was like my first sort of like, oh my God, you can learn another language at the same time, which is ridiculous when you think about it. Of course you can. Next question. Do you prefer dev or ops?
I prefer ops. I still, despite my railing on about how you shouldn't try to be a hero. I personally enjoy that feeling of solving the problem. I'm not going to say
Yeah.
that I enjoy necessarily being the hero, but I definitely enjoy being the person who has the insight that solves the problem. Right? Like you know. It's weird, right? Like when you're doing dev stuff, like there is some degree of I have the start of the problem, I have the end of the problem, I fill in the stuff in the middle, right? Like
Yeah.
you have some idea as to how it's going to go because you've decomposed the problem enough, right?
Yeah.
And I think with ops, it's a little bit more unpredictable. There's a little bit more novelty, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen when you open up the box, right? And I think that's the fun thing.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
not going to say it's necessarily about the esteem of having people be like, Liz, you solved it, like, but it's much more about the I find that it's really interesting to do the ops and to find new things.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with you. All right, next question. Do you prefer JSON or YAML?
I think I prefer JSON because it is not white space sensitive, and you can pretty print JSON if you need to. That being said, my pet peeve about JSON is the fact that they do not support the trailing comma in lists, and that peeves me off for to like nothing else. But no, I have to interact with YAML because of Kubernetes manifests and Circle CI configs, and I have broken enough YAML configs. Oh, and the handling of floats and the handling of like variables. Can we not just quote all of the keys and call it a day, right? Like, it's stuff like that just drives me up the wall.
Yeah, I feel yeah. I've heard a couple of horror stories with YAML. Like someone was telling me the other day, like, oh, ON which is the abbreviation for Ontario, is interpreted by YAML as on true. So it's like,
Oh
I know,
no!
right? So it's like all these little nuances in YAML where you have to be like extra careful, plus the white space. I still like YAML myself because I find it a little bit more readable than JSON. Because of like my Java days, all the curly braces in JSON just kind
Oh,
of
just feed it
is
to JQ.
frustrating.
Just feed it to JQ, and you'll be good, right? Like that's literally what I do anytime I encounter anything that's in JSON. Is I immediately pretty print it. You're
Yeah,
right.
yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I have to pretty print it because I just cannot function otherwise. I feel you. Okay, next question. Do you prefer spaces or tabs?
I am a Go programmer, so I am obliged to tell you tabs, but let's be real. I think that spaces work a little bit better in text editors because they actually render consistently. Like I have to manually configure like my tab width in Nano, my favorite text editor, in order to whenever I set up a new machine because it defaults to 8 spaces for a
Ooh,
tab, and that just
yikes.
eats your screen, right? It's
Yeah,
two. It's
yeah.
two, right? Like, so yeah. I personally would prefer spaces, except for Go makes me use tabs.
Ah, fair enough, fair enough. Okay, two more questions to go. Do you prefer to learn through video or text?
I am a text person. I use captions whenever I can because I just read so much faster than I audio process. Or rather, if I'm going to be listening to video, I have to listen to it at 1.75x or 2x. I just have to. Like it is. It's not that my audio processing is slow, right? Like it's actually the opposite of
Yeah,
that. It's that interacting with video at 1.0x is painful. And I will often multitask something else with it if you make me watch a video at 1.0x. Cue the obligatory HR videos where you have to sit and watch them and like click the little spinner at the end of 1 minute precisely, and it's just like, yeah. So yeah, text because I can read it however fast I want without having
yes.
to wait for the speaker to deliver the words.
Yeah, I agree with you. I actually watch TV with captions on, and it's just so
Right, like
it
I
holds
watch
it
TV
close.
with captions on, and I do something else so that if I right, like because I process not quite
Yeah,
at 2.0x, I process at 1.75x.
yeah,
So as a result, like if I do two things at the same time, I'm going to miss a little bit of each one, but the captions help
yeah,
me stay like keep my head
yeah,
in the
yeah,
game.
yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
ADHD 55.
one thing that I've never like been able to do is actually listen to stuff at like high speed, like faster than 1x. Like when I'm listening to a podcast, if I accidentally hit a button that makes it 1.25x, it actually drives me crazy. I'm like they're talking too fast for me. Like it breaks my brain. I don't know what it is, but so
Mm.
many people I talk to, they're like, I can only listen to it at like listen to stuff at super high speed. I'm like, more power to you all. Does not work for me at all. Okay, final question. What is your superpower?
What is my superpower? My superpower is I am. Are you familiar with Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes.
Okay, are
Like
you
high
familiar?
level familiar. High
Okay,
level
there's
familiar. Yeah.
a class that was added on afterwards that's called the Factotum, and the Factotum is able to emulate the ability of any other class by using a certain number of like knowledge points.
Okay.
I am a factotum, right? Like I am specialized in nothing in particular, but I am really good at being able to do things that specialists in other fields would do, but only like one or two of them, right? Like in other words, like being able to communicate with specialists in other fields, right?
Yeah.
So I can get people to talk to each other who don't necessarily kind of share common ground or share kind of skills. I can pick up those people's skills and use them at least for a time. So that's my superpower.
That is such a great superpower. And this leads nicely into, our main or one of our main topics of conversation, which is, I think when you and I met, you were at Honeycomb working as a DevRel, but in the last couple of years, you've transitioned over to being a field CTO. And for folks in our audience, it would be great if you could explain what that entails and also what prompted you to make that change.
Yeah, so field CTO is a role that is relatively new in the industry, and it really depends from field CTO to field CTO, company to company. So actually, the one of the field CTOs at Confluent, whose name is Kai, wrote a piece about it. But in essence, regardless of what someone's background is and where they come to being a field CTO from, being a field CTO is about interacting with customers who are making very sophisticated use of your technology, or otherwise have really interesting and gnarly technical problems or social problems. Honestly, the social problems are the more interesting ones. That they need the help of someone who is an expert and an expert at the executive level to solve.
Mm.
Right. So, and like a DevRel, right? Like, I don't necessarily write how-to blogs anymore. I don't necessarily, yes, I do speak at the occasional conference, but more and more of my time is spent on site with customers, and I think that is, interacting one on one with customers is something that I really really treasure, because it means that I get to see all the cool things they're doing with Honeycomb. And the other piece of my job that I really enjoy is going back to the product development team, and actually, I try to, as best as I can, carry water and chop wood for them, and also help solve technical problems that our customers are having at scale in our tool. So, for instance, I'm working this week on something where a customer was like, we want more than 100 group by fields in a Honeycomb query, and I'm like, okay, I'll see what I can do. Like,
Mhm.
let's talk to the team to see if it's possible. Let's try it out. So, yeah, so I've been field CTO for about 2 years now, coming up on 2 years in October. And it's been super, super rewarding to, now be at the executive level in Honeycomb, to have the opportunity to interact with the executives at other companies. It's weird. There's not like, a sudden transition in job responsibilities. I think it was more like, there's this funny thing that happened. In July of 2022, I was invited by Amazon to give the keynote or one of the customer keynotes at AWS Summit New York. And they gave me, the AWS PR team gave me a lot of side eye about, oh, you're, not an executive, you're not a CTO or VP. Like, what are you doing up on stage as a principal engineer?
Damn.
Right. And that was kind of a catalyst of, okay, fine. Like, titles do matter at some point. Right.
Uh-huh.
So I didn't, change what I was doing overnight, but instead I kind of gradually fell into the role, and then the job title changed afterwards.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
So, did you find then, because it was more of a gradual change, like there was like less, like was there anything still like super jarring that stood out for you when you made that change, or
I think the main thing that has really been kind of challenging is, when I was DevRel, I was part of the DevRel team, right? Like,
Mhm.
Jessitron, Martin Thwaites, right? Like,
Yeah.
Martin.net, right? Like, so, they're an amazing team, but I'm not part of that team anymore, right? Like,
Mhm.
Charity and I are off on our own as the office of the CTO. Right. And I think that,
Ah.
that is a little bit of a change in that I'm, not part of marketing anymore. I kind of don't have a department, right? Like, so I work across all the departments, but there's not necessarily anyone I can lean on who's like, like, you're working with me, like, let's do this. Right. So I kind of have to beg and borrow to work with people. And of course, people are happy to have the opportunity to work with
Yeah.
me, but like, it's not, I'm not part of their planning processes. Right. So if I
Right.
show up and, as happened the past 6 months, right? Like, if I show up and say, hey, by the way, we're going to be trying out Graviton 4, right? Like, that's something where I either need to drive it myself, or, I need to just find someone who wants to geek out about it with me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, does part of your job then entail like you coming up with some interesting like use cases to try out, or are you driven more by like customer asks, or is it a bit of both?
Customer and partner asks, but I do think that they're right. Like, so, for instance, the thing with Graviton 4, right? Like, that's Amazon, who's a partner of ours, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
they asked us to try it, and I said yes, right? You don't, in general, say no when Amazon asks you, do you want to try this shiny cool thing? But yeah, I think that majority of what I do is driven by what large customers are experiencing or what I can see they will be experiencing, right? Like, so I
Gotcha.
think there is some room for thought leadership, right? There is some room for like looking ahead of where things are. But historically as a company, Honeycomb has trended always, too far ahead of where the ball is today, right? Where people
Mhm.
can't necessarily see this is, how it aligns with what they're doing today, and we're trying to course correct that now and meet people where they're at now. So that's where I find myself spending a majority of time now is pragmatically connecting where people are with the challenges that Honeycomb help solve for them, and also seeing these are the integration points that we're going to need, right? So one of the projects I'm working on is relating to better log support in Honeycomb, because it turns
Mhm.
out that despite Charlie and me saying oh, throw your logs in the bin, like actually no, you can't, like Kubernetes emits logs, you're not going to throw Kubernetes in the bin, so like what do we do about that, right? What do we do about your legacy applications, right? Like, so yeah, kind of looking at that is something that I'm contributing to, right? Like, and that's really driven by what customers ask me about every day.
Right, right. That's so
Yeah, in
cool.
terms
And
of superpowers, right? Like, like another superpower, right? Like, we were
yeah,
just also like how I consume, right? Like, I read text incredibly fast, right? Like, as a result, I'm in like several hundred different Slack channels and I read them all, right? Like, and I can
yeah.
just do that. It's great, right? Like,
Oh, damn. That is a superpower.
yeah,
That's
I don't
great.
listen to all of this calls that our sales team have with clients, but boy, do I ever read the Gong summaries of all of the call recordings. So
So it's funny because like when you were describing the nature of the job initially, it almost felt like almost like a consultant role, but non-technical. But it is totally not that because there's definitely, it sounds like there's some very very technical aspects. So you're kind of like a super technical consultant who is working with like very high level like executives kind of thing, which
executives
is
and principal engineers, yeah, right. Like that's that first point of there's this really interesting or weird customer who's asking this question they've never seen before, right? Like
yeah.
hit me with it. Like I've been around the system long enough, and also I'm aware of what the best practices are around observability.
So does I wonder like does part of your job entail also like working with some of the solutions engineers, like pairing with them on that
Yeah, so I work with
effort?
our solutions engineers. I work with our customer support and our customer success team. I work with customer architects. I work with software developers. Right, like that's why I say I'm a factotum. I have to be able to speak sales. I have to be able to speak engineering. I have to be able to speak marketing. Right, like I have to be able to communicate with all of these people and collaborate with them daily.
And what's been your favorite part of being field CTO so far?
I think my favorite part is the variety of it, right? Like no customer is alike. So
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of fun. I think the gratification and the payoff of this is what we're building. This is how people are really actually leveraging it, right? Like that's also really really satisfying.
Is there any sort of thing that you've been working on that you're allowed to talk about where you're like, oh my god, this has been like the coolest thing I've gotten to do?
Yeah, I think one of my on and off fascinations is continuous profiling,
Hmm.
and it is very very weird in that it interacts with the very very guts of the kernel of the runtimes. So yeah, getting to interact with one of the Go subsystem maintainers, Cherry Mui, and sending her crash reports when the profiling doesn't work completely according to plan. Getting to work on our integration with profiling that we developed a couple of years back and that we continue to use ourselves. Right, like I think that's a lot of fun because it shows how much depth there is if you really, really, really want to get into understanding the performance of your system. You know, I do not necessarily recommend that our clients do this, right? Like, there's so much low-hanging fruit to find just via tracing. But like, we aim to be cost effective. We aim to be fast. And part of how you get there is by looking at continuous profiling and looking at the data down to the kind of nearest line of code. And I think that's a lot of fun. It's just maybe not quite at the level of application where everyone should be doing it. But that's kind of a thing that I've worked on and off for the past 2 years that I found to be just it's so much fun. And like, that engineer geek brain of like, I want to optimize the heck out of this. Like that's
Yeah.
the thing that that it really satisfies for me.
And speaking of profiling, like now profiling is actually one of the newest OTel signals, which is extremely exciting.
Yes, I was one of the people who nudged the Pyroscope team to start to form the SIG, and then people from all the profiling vendors joined, and it was wonderful. Yes, so I am really thrilled by it. I wanted to congratulate the people who work on it. And yeah, having kind of that singular profiling agent contributed by Elastic, like that's gonna be so amazing. In terms of just standardizing the format, standardizing how we can produce the data, and then leaving it to vendors and open source solutions for people to look at it, right? Like that kind of really, really opens up that opportunity for people to start using it in anger a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And just getting that extra little bit of insight now that, it's been standardized, which is super cool.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to switch gears a little bit because before we started recording, I asked if you had any interesting hot takes to share. So I will let you share your one of your hot takes.
Yeah, so as of when we're recording this, the Gartner Magic Quadrant just came out, and I was actually just on Reddit, like talking to a bunch of SREs who, and I think that it's interesting in that the SREs are saying Gartner got it wrong, and I may or may not have some spicy opinions about the way that the Gartner Magic Quadrant shook out, but I think it's really interesting to see. It's almost like a Rorschach test, right? Like you look at it and you see what you want to see, right? So yeah, my spicy take is that because I interact with enterprise buyers, SREs are not the enterprise buyer, right? Like so I saw SREs just slagging Gartner, right? Like and it's like, no, the Gartner analysts that I speak to are very smart. They know what they're doing. And their audience is executives. Their audience is executives at Fortune 100 companies, right? Like, so, you, an individual contributor SRE at some cool startup, the Gartner Magic Quadrant is not for you. So if you're complaining, why isn't Grafana ahead of Datadog and Dynatrace? The answer is that Grafana is maybe not quite as batteries included as that large enterprise really wants it to be, right? Like that's sure you can set up Grafana, that's great for you, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be the best choice for a big enterprise. So yeah, people were like, oh my god, like Gartner's so pay to play, and it's like, no, like Gartner does a fair job. Like, sure, you can buy their attention to listen to you, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee they're going to, say good things about you. See, you can get Gartner to, even mention your name in the quadrant, but that doesn't guarantee that you're going to score well according to their evaluation criteria. That being said, you can game their evaluation criteria. So I think that spicy take number 2 is I was actually looking at LinkedIn and I saw, Rob Skillington, one of the co-founders of Chronosphere, bragging about, how well they placed, and also saying like, they spent, hundreds of hours, a thousand hours working on, on making sure that they had every single qualifying attribute of the Gartner Magic Quadrant precisely shown in a demo video snippet, right? If you try super, super hard and, you curate your example to, demonstrate narrowly what Gartner's asking for, sure, you can do really well, right? Like, but I think competitively, right? Like, in the field, my own experience is that we do not tend to encounter Chronosphere in terms of it being a competitor we've run into in APM competitive situations, right? Like, they're primarily a metrics vendor, right? And newly a
Hmm.
logging vendor with their Calyptia acquisition, right? Like, and it seems very weird to me until I like saw Rob Skellington's post. It seemed very weird to me that a competitor that was so weak in the APM and tracing space could that very publicly trashed tracing and trashed open telemetry that they could score so well in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and then the pieces clicked together when I saw that they basically curated the view that they wanted Gartner to see, right? Whereas I can say, my team, right, like, and the extended team at Honeycomb, right, like we put in a good effort, right, like, and we showed the product as it is, right. We didn't invest a bunch of effort in, polishing it and, right, like. I think that that reflects it, right? Like Gartner is tough, Gartner is fair. I don't dispute where we placed in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. I think their criticisms of us were spot on, right? Like and those are things that we actually happen to be working on, right? Like so, yeah, I think the Gartner Magic Quadrant is a useful tool.
Hmm.
I think that it should be taken with skepticism and a grain of salt, but it is not pay to play. It is if you make one criticism, it's that you can put in a lot of effort to like look super sparkly, but that it is a fair perspective as to how the enterprise market perceives companies, whether it be observability or a different Magic Quadrant. So.
Hmm.
Sorry, SREs, you're wrong. Gartner is not being unfair to Grafana. Gartner is not being pay to play. But you are not the audience for the Gartner Magic Quadrant.
Right, that's super fair. And I have a follow up question on that, which is, how what's the process of being like one of the vendors that Gartner evaluates? Is that do they look at all the vendors in the space, like, or do you come to them? Like, do you?
They look at all the vendors in the space, although obviously some of the additions to that are a little bit weird. Like, in
Mhm.
past years, they've had Alibaba Cloud on there, and it's like,
Oh.
who? Right? And that might be an example of, okay, like this is a really niche thing that they were forced to add for one reason or another. But no, every major player in the space gets given a invitation to participate.
Oh, cool.
But as a criteria for inclusion, you are obliged to you're obliged to submit proof that you have a certain minimum number of customers. You're required to submit confidential proof of your top line revenue and the growth year on
Yeah.
year. And if you do not meet those criteria, you're not included, right? Like, so they actually added a note in their report saying Observing was not included in the report because they not because they failed to meet the functional criteria, but because they failed to meet the non-functional revenue and customer criteria, which was super spicy. Um, but right, like so yeah, it is a well-rounded set of the industry. Obviously a vendor can choose not to participate. I don't know why they would do that, but yeah, right, like so your employer, ServiceNow, Lightstep, is on the Magic Quadrant. I truthfully think you should have placed higher, but I wasn't privy to what you submitted to them. So yeah, that's kind of how it goes. Just lots and lots and lots and lots of spreadsheets, lots and lots of recording demo videos, and it's up to you how much time you want to invest in it. We're a 200 person startup. We decided to do a good enough job and not necessarily clip all the rough edges off.
Right, right. It's interesting because it almost sounds like the type of process that you go through for an audit. um, Obviously, not quite as much scrutiny, I would imagine, as doing an audit, but you have to put in the work.
Yep, yep.
There's another question that I want to ask. Having now that you're interacting a fair bit with enterprise customers, what's how has it been in terms of like differences that you've noticed between interacting with enterprise versus non-enterprise customers?
People are a little bit scared by the deploy on Fridays thing. It still is a little bit spooky to people, right? Like, and it's understandable that if your
Mhm.
deploys break regularly and break after a time delay of 24 to 48 hours, that you would be spooked about deploying on Fridays, right? So I kind of have to dial back the, Charity and Liz, like, break all the things. Rabble rousing, and I focus on stability, I focus on speed, and then I'm like, okay, now that you have stability and speed, like, let's talk about revisiting Friday deploys, right? Similarly, like, I've had to caveat the test in production to, like, you test in production whether you admit it or not, right? Like, we're not
Mhm.
saying don't test in staging, we're saying,
Right.
yeah. So I think that's definitely changed. I think the enterprises are not necessarily quite as willing to make large bets, um, with the exception of kind of innovation units in startups, or sorry, innovation units in enterprises, right? Like, so they spin up an internal team, they give them resources to work with public cloud, to work with the latest technology, right? Like, those teams are the teams that are more willing to be game to try and experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's not forget also the inordinately long process of getting approvals for anything enterprise related.
Firewall holes.
Oh my
Firewalls are my
god.
new enemy.
Oh my god. When I worked at Bank of Montreal for 11-ish years, and I think one of the most annoying things that I had to do in my time there was making firewall rules request changes. It was such a process, such a process. And I swear it like changed every time I did it. I just wanted to like pull my hair out. It was, yeah,
I
quite,
know, and we
quite
live in the
something.
world of public cloud, right? Like, I use ALBs. The IP addresses of my ALBs I cannot guarantee, right? Like, we have private link. That's how we solve that problem for a majority of cases, right? Like, because people understandably don't want to open a firewall hole to all of the US East 1, EC2 public IPs.
Yeah, I feel you. I feel you. One thing that I also wanted to ask, you spent many years at Google as an SRE. Do you miss it? Do you miss the SRE work?
I get to work with the SRE team at Honeycomb, and they are so incredibly talented and sharp, and I love working with them. No, I don't necessarily get to do that much SRE work myself anymore, but I get to help and work with SREs across many different companies, right? Like, so I'm kind of a meta SRE now, right? Like, I've
Ah,
come to terms with that.
yeah.
In terms of Google, yes, I miss my Google colleagues, but increasingly, whether due to layoffs or voluntary turnover, there's been this diaspora, and it's really nice to get to interact with them and potentially even work with them at Honeycomb. We just had a former Google SRE who became a platform engineering manager at Honeycomb, right? Like, so,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I do miss some. I do miss the people, but many of them have followed over into startup world, which is exciting.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And one other question that I wanted to ask, with regards to your role as field CTO, do you find coming into an organization, when you're proposing certain changes, how open are folks to making those changes?
It's a self-selecting bias, in that the people that I speak to are the people who have already chosen to engage Honeycomb or to do a trial with Honeycomb or like are otherwise investigating us. Right, that
Yeah.
means that a leader has a mandate for some kind of change.
Mm.
It may or may not be the change that we're proposing, but they do have a mandate for change. So that means that there is some appetite, at least by leadership. Yes, the people they are leading may or may not want to go along with that change, but that's
Mhm.
kind of their job as a leader is to have the trust of their organization and drive the change through the organization. So yes, there. I think one of the best times to approach someone,
Mhm.
on behalf of our sales team, is when someone's just made a job change, right? When they've just come in as a director or a VP or a CTO somewhere, right? Like, that means that they have a mandate to bring in new practices, and
Yes, yes.
Honeycomb Open Telemetry can be some of those new practices.
Yeah, that's so so true. And speaking of open telemetry, what's your involvement with open telemetry these days?
I'm an emeritus governance committee member. So right now, you know Austin Parker very well. So
Hmm.
so they're serving as a open telemetry governance committee member, and they're very easily accessible to me as we're both
Yeah.
Honeycomb employees. The governance committee seat belongs to the individual, not to the company. But because I don't see a reason for duplication though of having multiple people who work at the same company being on the GC. So I haven't felt the need to stand for the GC. I recently submitted some pull requests to the Open Telemetry Go project. So I'm still
Ooh.
right. Like I explicitly said I do not want my approver status back. Thank you very much. Right. Like I don't have enough time to contribute. But
Yeah.
hey, by the way, here's a drive by performance fix. Right.
Yeah. Oh, that's
So yeah,
awesome.
whenever I see a problem that I can help a customer address with my familiarity with OpenTelemetry, I'll do it.
Yeah.
But we have an entire engineering team that's dedicated to working on OpenTelemetry now. Like I don't have to do that change unless it's something that's super quick and easy for me.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And I think it's so great that so many of the observability vendors out there have dedicated teams to work on open telemetry, which I think really speaks to like the staying power of OTel and that they, collectively everybody wants OTel to succeed. And I absolutely love that.
Yeah, right. Like it is our SDK, right? Like
Hmm.
it
Yeah.
is our SDK that we collectively have to maintain in order to make sure all of our customers have a good experience. It's a little bit
Yeah.
decentralized, but it means that we're working on the same project despite having our paychecks paid by different people, and that's okay.
Yeah, totally. And one thing that I always say over and over is I really appreciate the vendor neutrality aspect of OTel because I interact with folks in OTel who are from different companies and I don't look at them as competitors. They're just like friends, people I work with. Like we're all working towards the same goal, and that it's so deliberate that anytime there's like a hint of like this might not be vendor neutral, people are like. You might want to reconsider like rewording it, or I'm sorry, we can't accept this because it violates our vendor neutrality policy. Super fair, and I love that.
Yeah, the only bugbear there has been when someone's marketing department releases something without checking it first with the OTel team
Mm,
at that vendor, right? When there's
yeah,
right, people are pretty good about self policing, unless there's just a lack of communication, right?
yeah,
And you could say that about engineering too, right? Like lack of communication. That's what causes like things to go awry more often than not.
yeah, absolutely, totally agree with you. Well, we are coming up on time, so before we wrap up, I was wondering if you had any parting words of wisdom that you wanted to share with folks.
I think my parting word of wisdom is always be trying new things. And if that new thing is open telemetry, great. The starting experience is super easy, but no. Yeah, just keep on learning. That's never just be like I'm in my bread and this is what I do.
Yeah, I love that. And so important for tech as well, right? I mean, you either learn new stuff or you wither away from the industry. Well, thank you so much, Liz, for geeking out with me today. Y'all don't forget to subscribe and be sure to check the show notes for additional resources and to connect with us and our guests on social media. Until next time,
Peace out and geek out.
Geeking Out is hosted and produced by me, Adriana Vilela. I also compose and perform the theme music on my trusty clarinet. Geeking Out is also produced by my daughter, Hannah Maxwell, who incidentally designed all of the cool graphics. Be sure to follow us on all the socials by going to bento.me/geekingout.